Updated CDC guidelines for COVID exposure, timeline, quarantine, contagious period. What steps should you take if someone you have been in close contact with tests positive for coronavirus? How long are you contagious? What are the quarantine guidelines and when is it safe to see people again? Here's the latest guidance from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention on what to do if you test positive or believe you were exposed to someone who has. How soon might symptoms appear? According to the CDC, COVID symptoms can appear anywhere from 2 to 14 days after someone is exposed to the virus. Anyone exhibiting symptoms should get tested for COVID-19. When should you get a COVID test? Those who have been fully vaccinated and around someone who has COVID-19 are recommended to get tested between 5 and 7 days after their exposure, according to the most recent guidance from the CDC, though previous guidance had been between 3 and 5 days. Those who develop symptoms should get tested as symptoms develop, but if a test is negative and symptoms persist, another test might be needed a few days later, particularly for those who use at-home test kits. So if someone is having symptoms and they get a negative test, 1. It depends on the severity, right? If you're having severe symptoms, we don't want you to just do a home test either, said Dr. Nimi Rajagopal, the Associate Chair of the Department of Family and Community Medicine for Cook County Health. We want you to call your doctor's office and make sure that they have an opinion here, because there are of course other things like the flu that are out there that can mimic symptoms or have similar symptoms. But if you're having symptoms and they're kind of mild and lingering and you use the at-home test and it's negative, we want you to take the precautions and then retest in 3 to 5 days. And that's why most of these kits actually come with 2 tests. When is someone with COVID contagious? A person with COVID-19 is considered infectious starting 2 days before they develop symptoms, or 2 days before the date of their positive test if they do not have symptoms. How long should you quarantine or isolate? First things first, those who believe they have been in contact with someone who has COVID and are unvaccinated should quarantine. Those who test positive, regardless of vaccination status, must isolate, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Here's the breakdown. Quarantine those who have been within 6 feet of someone with COVID for a cumulative total of at least 15 minutes over a 24-hour period should quarantine for 5 days if unvaccinated or more than 6 months out from their second dose, according to updated CDC guidance issued Monday. Once that period ends, they should partake in strict mask use for an additional 5 days. Previously, the CDC said people who were not fully vaccinated and who came in close contact with an infected person should stay home for at least 10 days. Prior to Monday, people who were fully vaccinated, which the CDC has defined as having 2 doses of the Pfizer or Moderna vaccines, or one dose of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine could be exempt from quarantine. Local health authorities can also make the final determination about how long a quarantine should last. However, and testing can play a role. For example, in Chicago, those who travel to or from certain parts of the country and are unvaccinated must quarantine upon arrival to Chicago, but the length of time they should do so for depends on whether they get tested for COVID. The city's travel advisory recommends those who travel from the designated warning states must get tested with a viral test 3 to 5 days after travel and stay home and self-quarantine for a full 7 days. Even if you test negative, stay home and self-quarantine for the full 7 days. If your test is positive, isolate yourself to protect others from getting infected. If you don't get tested, stay home and self-quarantine for 10 days after travel. Quarantine can end after day 10 without testing, and if no symptoms have been reported during any day of the daily monitoring period. Quarantine can end after day 7 if a RT, reverse transcriptase, PCR test is negative and if no symptoms were reported during any day of the daily monitoring period. The earliest a specimen may be collected and tested would be on day 6, with quarantine being discontinued no earlier than day 8. This option is not recommended for children in daycares or K-12 schools, however. Due to the risk of severe illness and congregate transmission, IDPH recommends the full 14-day quarantine period rather than the shortened options described above. In congregate living settings with vulnerable populations, such as skilled care and correctional facilities, the Illinois Department of Public Health states on its website. For schools, the guidance is different. In these settings, IDPH guidance states that any student or school personnel who is a confirmed case or probable case should stay home for a minimum of 10 days following onset date if symptomatic, or date of positive test if asymptomatic, or as otherwise directed by the school's local health authority. Any unvaccinated student or school personnel who is a close contact must stay home for a minimum of 14 days or as otherwise directed by the school's local health authority, which may recommend options such as exclusion for 10 days without testing but with daily symptom check, or 7 days with a negative test result on day 6. As an alternative to exclusion, schools may permit close contacts who are asymptomatic to be on the school premises, extracurricular events, or any other events organized by the school if both the confirmed case or probable case and the contact were masked for the entire exposure period and provided the contact tests negative on days 1, 3, 5 and 7 following the exposure. Individuals who are fully vaccinated or who tested positive for COVID-19 within prior 90 days and are currently asymptomatic are not considered close contacts. Any student or school personnel who exhibit symptoms of COVID-19, as defined by the CDC, should stay home until they test negative for COVID-19, or for a minimum of 10 days, until they are fever-free for 24 hours and until 48 hours after diarrhea or vomiting have ceased.